It's my pleasure to welcome you here to what I believe is our 24th annual Malcolm Comeaux lecture. This is the 2025 lecture, and our speaker today is going to be Rachel Franklin. We'll do a full introduction to her later, but I wanted to give a little bit of background. So first of all, I am Dave Saylor. I'm the director of the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning, and I want to talk to you a little bit about, before we introduce our speaker, about the history of this lecture and about Malcolm, the person behind this lecture. So as you can probably tell by the name of the lecture series, none of us would be here today sitting in this room for this lecture if it weren't for the generosity and the vision of Malcolm Comeaux, who is here today. So maybe a quick round of applause for Malcolm here. So Malcolm received his PhD in geography back in 1969 from LSU, Louisiana State University. And he then came that same year to be a professor here at ASU, initially in what was the geography department, and then through several iterations, we've become what we are today, which is the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. So his research, when he came to the university, and for really 3 decades, was focused on a number of different aspects, including cultural diffusion and change, historical geography, geography of Arizona and the desert Southwest more broadly, and the French of Louisiana. As you can see, there's a couple of university connections back to Louisiana. And importantly, also on geographic education. And in fact, thinking about Malcolm's legacy, there are a couple of legacies. One is this lecture series, and I'll highlight some of that history in a minute here. But the other one is that he was the person behind developing the Arizona Geographic Alliance, which is a K-12 educational outreach organization that has impacted thousands upon thousands of students and their and high school and grade school teachers across Arizona. And beyond that, he has been really an inspiration in the development of our school the way it is today. And so this lecture series, as it says here, honors Malcolm Comeaux's work both as a scholar, but also as a teacher and an institution builder. So again, a little thank you for Malcolm there. And what's scrolling across the screen right now, just to give you a sense, and it's going faster than I probably should have made it go, is, here we go, we'll double that up, is just the list of speakers that have come over the past 24 years. And so, this just gives you a flavor of the kind of impact that this lecture series has had. If you just look at some of the illustrious names that are on this list, completing with today's speaker, Rachel Franklin, which we'll get to in a second here. So again, thank you, Malcolm, for what your generosity has been able to create here for us. So now what I'd like to do is I'd just like to invite up Dylan Connor. So he's a faculty member in GSUP, SGSUP, School of Geographical Science and Urban Planning, and also a member of our colloquium committee, and he will do a more formal introduction for our speaker today. So Dylan.
How is the sound? Is it okay? Brilliant. That's mine, yeah. So it's my great pleasure to introduce and to welcome Rachel Franklin as our Comeaux speaker. We only invite excellent people to give the Comeaux talk, and we're delighted that Rachel has agreed to join us tonight. So Rachel is the executive director at the Center for Geographical Analysis at Harvard University. Prior to moving to Harvard, she was a professor of geographical analysis at Newcastle University and a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute. Most recently, Rachel has become the editor at the Annals of the American Association for Geographers. And interestingly, in the section of general geography and cross-disciplinary research. And so it's a really exciting position given the vision of our school as an interdisciplinary unit in the geographical sciences. It's not Rachel's first time to Arizona. She was a PhD student at the U of A working with David Plain, but I believe it is Rachel's first time to visit Tempe, and so I hope we've made a good impression on you, Rachel. So when I think about Rachel as a scholar, I kind of think about you as having kind of two hats. One of Rachel's hats is as a population geographer and as a serious social scientist working on topics such as shrinking cities, left behind places, livability. And Rachel's other hat is kind of as a bigger thinker around GIS and geography. So Rachel has written articles on geography and GIS as a social science, the kind of future directions of quantitative human geography, and even an article on gender bias in editorial boards within quantitative geography. And so Rachel's one of these kind of big thinkers seeing many different sides of our discipline. If you haven't listened to her podcast, Geography, Life and Data, or the GLAD podcast, it's the best geography podcast out there. If you have Spotify, you can search GLAD and you can listen to Rachel, actually with one of our former PhD students, Levi Wolf, and a third collaborator. There's 2 excellent episodes for grad students and postdocs on navigating the geography job market, and a recent episode on thinking about AI in geography in the future. So I just want to say 3 quick things about why I'm really excited for tonight's talk and to hear from Rachel. So as I had said, Rachel is one of these few people who has a really good vision of what's going on in GIS and GI science, but also what's going on in human geography. And this is kind of a challenge that I think many geography departments deal with, and I think we deal with here. And I'm really interested to hear Rachel's talk tonight on how she kind of thinks about the future of geography and GIS and how that all fits together. The second thing is that if you hear Rachel speak or if you read her writing, she always has something interesting to say. And I think that that's a kind of a great distinction as a scholar. And actually one of our grad students said this week that Rachel organizes the most interesting sessions at the AAG. And so in the interest of disclosing failures, there was a time when I really wanted to be Rachel's postdoc, and I was unsuccessful. And so and so for better or for worse, I ended up at Arizona State. And finally, I just want to say that, and I'm sure this will come true tonight, Rachel approaches her work with kind of real frankness and honesty, and I think she's kind of very forthright in what she says, and I really appreciate that. And I think actually her signature brand is actually approaching her work with kind of a lot of fun and excitement. And so, with that, let me welcome Rachel, and join me in welcoming Rachel for a fun and exciting talk.
Wow, that might be like the nicest introduction I have ever had. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to do this thing where I need to change over to my slides. And we're all going to hope that everything goes smoothly. All right, so first of all, send me your papers at Annals. I'm always in search. If you've got that best paper, send it to me. Send it to the cross-disciplinary section. I will be super happy to take care of that baby one way or the other and make sure it ends up somewhere nice. Second, what do I want to say? This may not be the most successful title that I've ever come up with, but I am so proud of this title. I am not a Taylor Swift fan, but Taylor Swift came out with this album that was called the Tortured Poets Department. And when I had to give a title, I thought, it would be really good for somebody who's kind of angsty and wants to express a little bit of discontent. It would be the Tortured Geographers Department. So I hope you remember that, because I worked really hard on it. But what I'm really going to talk about mostly is spatial data, data science and AI, and what I would call red herrings, right? So in the spirit of Taylor Swift, this is an album with 8 tidy tracks. We've got side 1, which is big picture, and then side 2, which is going to be examples, because I think probably for a lot of you, you don't know who I am, and maybe you would like to know what kinds of research questions drive me, how I approach them, and hopefully that kind of connects to the first side of the album, which is the stuff that is kind of keeping me up at night. So I hope that by the end, And also, I hope that this whole album construct works for people who don't listen to albums anymore. But it used to be, if you had a cassette or a record, that there was a structure to albums. Like it really mattered what song was first and how you ended the first side. Like there was a lot of thought that went into this, and I'm not sure any of that holds. But that's what was in my head when I came up with this. All right, so these are the liner notes, which we also don't really have anymore, but like the sort of big picture is that red herrings, for those who haven't encountered them before, are distractions from real problems at hand. And I think that always we're facing distractions, and right now I think there are a few that we're especially facing. And so I'm going to talk about what I think about. I'll talk a little bit about how I approach this in my own research, and then I'll offer some concluding thoughts. And if you can see down at the bottom, it does actually say 63 slides, but I promise some of them don't have very much text. Okay, so big picture is that we live in really exciting times for data and for methods, right? I think that is fantastic. As somebody who is not a methodologist, but really, really likes methods, this is a great time to be alive in a lot of ways because we can pick from all of the traditional quantitative methods, plus all of the ways that sort of data science brought forward analytical techniques, and now we have like this flourishing area of artificial intelligence. So you put it all together, and you would think that it's like a banquet, you know? Like we've got a question and we can go and we can choose more than we've ever been able to choose before, and that really matters for research. So I think we also live in interesting times. I will try not to use too many scare quotes, but like there are a lot of real problems that face us, like as a society. Some of them are environmental, some of them are economic and social, and regardless of what your political persuasion is, like I think it's clear that like we're at a lot of inflection points in a lot of different ways, and so it's really timely that we've got the great data and the great methods because these things should be working together. And then, and I realize this is not an audience only of geographers, but I think this holds for urban planning, it holds for all of the spatial sciences. I think we live in sort of complicated disciplinary times, and I think that that matters. The things we choose to do research on, the things we choose to publish on, the way we choose to hire, all of this comes back eventually to affect us in our own disciplines and sort of how we're seen in the wider world and what kind of role we have politically, what kind of heft we have. So I think all of these things matter. So that's what slide one is. Okay, so track one is that our data ecosystem is diverse and it's growing. And the main point that I want to make here is that it's so much more than like the cool new, like in the UK we call them like new and emerging forms of data. It's so much more than that, right? Like we focus so much on the social media data, on sensors, on the internet, mobility, street view, and those things are all really powerful and really interesting. But to me, the really cool thing is that there's a lot going on. Like all of this historical data that we now have methods to be able to extract information from, that's huge, right? And we don't talk about it so much, but we've got, you know, we know about censuses, we know about historical surveys, archaeological sites, all these inventories. I mean, I've worked with historians and archaeologists who work with diaries, who work with historical maps. All of this is data, right? We just need a way to extract it. I think that that is amazing. We've got the big smart data. We've got government and administrative data. If you've ever had to have drinks with me late at night, then you know I love our decennial census in this country. I think the decennial census is like one of the most amazing collective efforts that we do as a society. And it's also fantastic data, right? But medical records, vital records, administrative records. And then one of my favorite things is linked data. Like I don't know, it's untapped. It's not only that we have all of these different kinds of data sets, it's that we now are much, much better at putting them together, like putting individuals together, putting households together, stringing together all of this information. That allows us to answer questions that we've never been able to answer before. And then we have satellite imagery, aerial photography, drones, LiDAR, and a lot of this has been around for a long time, right? It's just that I think sometimes we have a tendency when we talk about data to focus only on this new sexy piece, but actually this ecosystem, it is really, really huge and growing, partly because we've got the methods to be able to tap into that information, right? Data need infrastructure. I care a lot about data infrastructure because I think it's really important for all researchers to be able to access high quality data to do the research that they want to be able to do, right? And this isn't only technical. So I took a picture actually of Dylan's office. He has like a powered by IPMS sticker hanging from his office sign, which is Minnesota's Population Center, which has provided data infrastructure for social scientists for well, since the previous century. I used it just the other day to pull data to quickly make a map. It's huge. It takes a lot of investment. But it's not only that technical piece, it's all of this sort of social piece that we need to help make sure that people know how to use data, know how to curate it, know how to take care of it, pass it along to future generations. And like any infrastructure, data require investment, and that's investment in time, it's investment in capacity building, and it's definitely investment in money, right? So it costs a lot to have data infrastructure, and it requires maintenance. And it also crumbles with lack of attention. So I might be stretching this a little bit, but when I put this slide together, I was thinking a little bit about worries about data access, and what do we do if some kinds of data cease being available? And I wanted to make a comment in one of the meetings today, maybe with the students or at lunch, but about like what's happening with jobs. I think it was at lunch. I said, like, what's happening with jobs in AI? We don't know because we don't have a jobs report. That's actually really important, right? Like we need to know what's happening. Data tell us what the pulse is of our society. And we really have to make sure we take care of it so that it's there not only for us, but for the next generation. And so I think probably most of you would agree that it's easy to take it for granted. Most of us don't want to work on creating data or taking care of data for other people to do their research. Most of us just want it to be available for us when we want to do our research, okay? Okay, so then track 2 is that this breadth of methods, it's never been greater. I added that this morning. So this one's a dance tune because I'm pretty excited about all of the methods that we have to work with. I happen to really like our traditional methods. And I think one reason maybe that I like them is that I grew up with them, so they're very familiar to me. And so I think sort of traditional quantitative methods, as many in my generation would have learned them, almost inherently married the conceptual and the theoretical to the method. So I'm not a strong numbers person. For me, it was always the concepts, that if I could start to see how relationships work, if I start to understand how X is impacting Y and what all of the mediating factors might be, and like what is preventing us from actually measuring solidly this relationship, like that, I can understand that without having a lot of math. And so I do believe strongly in like the strong foundation of traditional methods, because it's how we start to think about relationships and associations. It's how we collapse data dimensionality. It's how we compare groups and outcomes. And then, like 10 years ago, we started to talk a lot more about data science. To me, data science is, both data science and AI are interesting because some of it is old wine and new bottles, right? Like some of it is stuff that we've always been doing and we just put a new badge on top of it, especially stuff around algorithms. Anything to do with clustering, like we've been clustering for a very long time and people were clustering with like SPSS, right? I mean, so it's not that like suddenly we invented these techniques with the advent of data science and AI. But there was something about the data science, and I think the forward-thinking bit about being able to code and program. So this is when I think we really started to talk more about R and Python. I think that has been revolutionary across the social sciences. And also, I think really importantly, that when we started to talk about visualization. And as spatial people, like we all understand the power of a map. But every once in a while, I'll go think, well, what if I wanted to make like a new kind of graphic? And if you search like anything to do with R and data visualizations, you get like these amazing varieties of ways of showing your data. And I think that that is really fun and also powerful. And so for me, this has been a great time to be alive. Okay, machine learning and AI, I'm kind of going to put into the same category. I'm not going to talk a lot about these methods, except to say that for me, the really cool thing about machine learning and AI is this at-scale piece. A lot of the things that we do, clusters are a really great example. A lot of the things that we do, you could, in theory, do by hand if your data set was small enough, right? And then you could think like over time, we've been able to do more and more. You could have more and more observations, more and more variables. You could cover more geographic space. What we can start to think about now is something we'd like to think that's approaching the sort of population level, like true but unknown relationships that just emerge from the data. I'm skeptical, but also this is new. We weren't able to do that, right? And particularly, like it's stuff like extracting buildings right, from satellite imagery. Like, we've been doing remote sensing in the spatial sciences for such a long time, but the idea that you could start to extract like houses and garages and like very small features, that is really big. That allows us to maybe start to say something complete about our study area where we were only making guesses before, right? Extracting street networks from historical maps. Very hard. Like, it's true that we have all these great data, all these great historical data, but we need a lot of computational power and skills to be able to pull that information out at scale. Like, when I learned GIS, it was a previous century, and it was still ArcInfo, but we like had a tablet and like a little mouse, and you had to like, if you wanted to like make a polygon, you had to go click, 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 and then make a polygon, and then you had to check it. Super labor intensive, right? So at best, even if you were cracking jokes about your PhD students or undergraduates doing this work for you, at best, your study area was going to be really small. Now we can talk about like, what would this look like for entire countries, right? For entire continents. We can actually start to build up, I think, real understanding of what we think is happening, potentially. All right, so I think methods are really exciting. Okay, so we've got this sort of unprecedented potential, but we've also got some challenges, right? And so the potential is that, as I said in my introduction, we face these, there's just no way around it, right? There are wicked challenges that are social, they're environmental, they're health-related. Increasingly, I think we're acknowledging that a lot of them are demographic, and we don't really know what to do. And some of this data and AI are not necessarily going to solve for us. So this is sort of a complicated moment to be in, where we know that we have all these tools in our toolkit, and we know that we've got problems, but how are we effectively going to bring them all together, right? And it'd be great. I love the idea of, even if we're not changing policy, just knowing more about this world that we live in. Like, that's a magical thing to be able to do. Doing interesting research. I have been blessed in my erratic career to only ever have to do research that I wanted to do. So the downside of taking a really long time to get like a tenured job is that I never really just like something was interesting to me, so I did research on it. And I think all of us should get to have that, right? And right now we live in a moment for lots of interesting and innovative research. Yeah, and training the next generation to be even better than where we are. So I think this is like really interesting times to be in. But I'm going to call us all social scientists here, but I think this is going to hold even if you call yourself an environmental scientist or some other kind of scientist, is that we get, we're like magpies or raccoons. It's shiny, it's new, it's fundable, we do it. And that kind of gets in the way, I think, of actually doing all this stuff that we, like we talk a big game. We all know this, right? We know how important this is, but we see something new and we're on it. And there are lots of reasons, and I think this is a really interesting area for conversation, because I think we're all complicit in how this happens, because it's how we decide what's going to get published in lots of journals. If it's like not cool data and not a cool method, even if you could use the traditional method to answer this really important question, if it doesn't say AI right now, the reviewers aren't going to like it. That's not great. And another example that I think is equally true, for example, is that in a lot of journals, definitely ones that I've edited, if you did some kind of analysis and it was in ArcGIS Pro, even if the results would have been exactly the same if you had used Python or R, reviewers are not going to like it. Reviewers don't think that's sophisticated enough. That is bizarre. That is just a really weird world to be living in, and I think that we should be cautious about this new and shiny if it's getting in the way of the really good science. Okay, so here are the red herrings on the path to spatial greatness, which I think we can all get behind, right? So this is ways in which I think data and methods can get in the way of addressing real problems that are around improving well-being, reducing spatial inequalities. I'm speaking very much from the perspective of the things that I care about. So here's my tortured geographer part of the talk. And this is long and kind of vibey because it's the end of the first side, okay? So AI, like if I never have to hear AI ever again, it will be too soon. And it's not because I don't think the methods are valuable, it's this distraction piece. And also, there is just no such thing as, let's use AI for this. Like if you find yourself saying that, then I think you already have a problem, because AI is not like one thing. It's like a basket of techniques and approaches that are used for different kinds of problems. And I think we should be much more specific, because I think we do ourselves a disservice when we start talking about using AI. And I know why we do it. It's because it gets us funded, it gets us hired, it gets us published. But it's not helpful when you think about that smorgasbord of methods that we have at our disposal. AI gets on my nerves. GeoAI also really gets on my nerves. And I have less of a clear sense of why I feel that way, but I think it has to do with like the specificity of like method and problem, and that I think that they should be very closely married, right? So, right, I think that the problem in hand should determine the method. And I think it might often be AI, but all of us have found ourselves in the other position. We have really great data, or we just, like, I've definitely discovered new methods, and I'm like, okay, like I've got this method, I'm gonna need to use this. And like, I think that's great, but it does mean that there's a lot of extra work that has to happen to like actually make sure that that research is something that is interesting and maybe potentially useful. Right? So it's not to say that we should, like, this is not like a Luddite talk. And I think AI has its place, but it has a place that is as an element of a much wider choice set. Right? So I think our collective challenge is figuring out how AI, machine learning, data science, how they advance knowledge, and how they actually help make the world a better place. And that making the world a better place isn't only affecting policy, it's also training people, it's also, you know, building knowledge and understanding. There are lots of ways that we all collectively are making the world a better place, or should be thinking about making the world a better place. And I think we should keep in mind that opportunity costs are a real thing, right? I mean, like, so if for example, NSF is funding research, and NSF decides to go in, like in the spatial sciences, for a lot of AI, that necessarily means that other people with other kinds of methodological approaches are not getting funded. And I don't think that that is healthy for us as an ecosystem. We really need diversity. And if we really care about diversity, diversity is diversity of approach, perspective, methods, data, and we need that, because that's how we build our understanding of like how the world is actually working. Right? And so these opportunity costs at the moment, I think, are risky. And as a quantitative human geographer, I have to say, I feel like the only way someone like me makes a job change now is by being a GI scientist, right? We don't hire for quantitative human geographers, because now we hire for a shiny thing, which was GI science and is now going to be AI. So, you know, I think you push that out a few years, and I don't think it's very good for the science or for the individuals or the discipline. Okay, big data. Yeah, I think it's exciting and cool. I love hearing about new data sources. I'm sad that we spend so much time on the social media data, or like right now it's mobile phone data, when there's so much cool stuff with like historical data, or like linked administrative records. Like there's just so much potential for really cool stuff, but because we're so attracted to this, and I'm speaking now mostly to the social scientists in the room, there's this very narrow set of kinds of data that we're really into right now. And I don't like it, because these data, and I'm thinking like mobile phone data, social media data, even at an extreme, the really high resolution satellite imagery, no one consented to this. No one said, please use my Twitter data, my Facebook data, like any of this, to do whatever you're going to do. And I do think that there's something that we should reckon with, right? Because I do think that I think informed consent is a really great thing, and I think we should all believe in it. And we also have very clear issues around bias and representation. Like this, Twitter data do not represent, they did not at any point represent like everyone in society. And so you privilege certain kinds of voices and certain kinds of perspectives with methods that are like kind of good at capturing this stuff. Like if you've ever dealt with people who are doing like sentiment analysis from Twitter data, like it's nuts, because we can't really, unless someone said, I hate this. It's very difficult from like a set of words put together to know that like this is how somebody really felt when they tweeted whatever this thing was about something, right? And yet, this is sort of what we do. And I think we should care about privacy. And I think privacy, I think this privacy is a social construct. And I think that like what that means to me is that there is not like one thing that is privacy. It has definitely changed over time. 150 years ago, people had very different ideas about like what a household would be like and how many people would live in a room and eat in a room and like sleep together in a room and like give birth in a room and go to the bath. I mean, like, and yet, you know, privacy was a thing then too. So I think there is something about privacy which should allow us to look in people's backyards and see what they're doing with high resolution satellite imagery. But I think we should probably talk about it a little bit more because it has a lot of implications. And when we talk about imagery, like with my collaborators, a point that one of my collaborators made was that it isn't even so much like, could you see like someone and their kids in their backyard? It's more like you use street view imagery or satellite imagery to say like how nice a neighborhood is, and suddenly some person's house is worth a lot less money because of your research, and somebody else's house is worth more. Like, have you considered that this was going to be the follow-on impact of like this thing that you've decided to do? And I don't think that we're always thinking about it in that way, but we probably should. Yeah, and I apologize to people who have already heard me, like this is like Rachel's soapbox. These data, these cool new data, especially like the mobile phone data, but the Twitter data, all of it's relying on the traditional forms of data. And if you think about the opportunity costs, like in countries like the UK, there is serious discussion about no more census because they don't have it in their constitution. They don't have to do it. They think they can just use novel forms of data to do a census instead, right? And so there is this opportunity cost of focusing so much on the new sexy data that you lose the underlying data, the underpinning data that is actually telling you like what the characteristics are of the people who are doing the moving or saying that they hate something. And so we can really love the new data, but we need to be really loud and vocal about how important the traditional forms of data are. Just really important. Okay, so I wish that we were talking more, another soapbox. I wish we were talking more about like how we have so many tools at our disposal now to revolutionize the traditional forms of data. So if you talk to people about the big surveys like transportation surveys or anything to do with attitudes or behaviors, they'll say people just don't answer their phones anymore. And now they don't respond to the emails anymore. So surveys are dead. We're not going to do surveys anymore. We need the cell phone data. And I think, yeah, but you give me $10 million or whatever you get for a really large infrastructure project around Twitter or cell phone data, and I guarantee you, we can at least practice how we're going to get people to opt into these kinds of surveys. I guess what I'm trying to say in terms of opportunity cost is like, yeah, it's expensive, and yeah, it's hard, but this other thing that we're doing already that we are spending the money on, it's also hard and expensive. And we've decided to just focus on this kind of data instead of trying to come up with new kinds of data. And I think it'd be a really exciting, like this to me is a research challenge. Like this is hard. This is way harder than trying to figure out like mobile phone trajectories, like getting people to like respond to surveys from their phones or getting people to agree that their phone could track them as they move. That was hard, but it'd be really cool. Okay, and once we have these things, we don't necessarily keep them forever, right? And faucets get turned off for data infrastructure. Yeah, data disappear from government websites. Like we actually have to take care of our data and our data infrastructure. Okay, so AI and big data together. I'm still on my my tortured nightmare piece of the talk, right? So it is a match made in heaven. It is really cool. Like you need the two, it is a match in the sense of like a marriage. Like in order to do all the cool stuff with these new forms of data, you need a lot of the really cool new methods. Like they just go hand in hand together. But it also, it's like this temptation to just do the fun part without any reason for doing it. It's just because you can. And that wastes a lot of energy. It wastes a lot of your brain energy. It wastes a lot of research energy, reviewer energy. And so it'd be great if we really encouraged everyone around us through whatever mechanisms we have to ask the like, so what? Like, why would we do this? And we've always done, I mean, like, we've always done the potential policy implications. Like, this is not new. Like people have always just sort of waved their hands and said, this could be useful. But I think now we're in times where, like, a lot of stuff, and I don't mean to be so critical, but a lot of stuff that I read or have to review or deal with, it has no real point. And I am not even always sure that the people who are doing it were really, really excited. And that makes me kind of sad, because it should at least be fun, right? It should, that should come through. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some examples. Side 2, that's it. We're already on the second side of the album, but this doesn't have as many tracks, so it's going to be a little bit slower. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a few. So this won't be this is a few research projects, but they're projects that married the data and the methods in different ways. And so I want to share sort of my journey and how we thought about these things and what interests me, so you get a sense of where I'm coming from. And so the first one, track 5, first track, second side, spatial inequality and the smart city. And so this was a project, it's done now, it went on for about 3.5 years, that was thinking about emerging technologies, in particular sensor networks, and how those interface with the spatial demography of cities, right? And in particular, how this makes spatial inequalities worse, how it either creates them or reproduces them. And originally, this was the only, so this was a funded research project. I led this project. I got it as soon as I arrived in Newcastle. And this is the only time that this has happened in my life. But I was told, you're going to be made a fellow at this National Institute of Data Science and AI. This is the Alan Turing Institute. And as a fellow, you get a project. So what are you going to do? And I was like, ooh, I don't know. And I was thinking, well, I should collaborate with my, I'm at a new university. I should look around and see what people do. And I should this is a great opportunity to build some new connections. And we have a thing at Newcastle called the Urban Observatory, which is an online system of sensor networks that measure all kinds of things: air quality, noise, beehives. And I thought it'd be great to work with these civil engineers on this. And my initial idea was, if you knew sort of, if you know what air quality is, so this whole project ended up being about air quality sensors. If you knew sort of how people were moving throughout the city, you could come up with estimates of exposure to different levels of air quality, right? Because you know what the air quality is. The mobility piece is a little bit tougher. But I thought this would be kind of cool, because I'm a spatial demographer. I'm really interested in people, and exposure measures are kind of neat. And then they showed me this map of their sensor network, and I was like, why are the sensors here? And they're like, oh, I don't know. We're opportunistic in where we place the sensors. And so then it was like an immediate pivot, because then I was like, well, there should be some attention paid to where sensors are placed. And so when the postdoc came on board, the first postdoc came on board, and it turns out that at this point, so this is 2018, cities were all in on the sensor networks. Now I think we're in on the sensor networks, but we don't talk about them so much. But this is the time of industry coming into cities and placing air quality sensors, cities trying to figure out how they were going to place their sensors. And it turned out that in some cases, cities had thought very carefully about how they were going to make sort of collective city level decisions so that everyone got to feed into where air quality sensors are. But in many cases, it was just kind of ad hoc. And it's ad hoc for some really good reasons. So in fairness, in the UK anyway, you don't control very much of the street infrastructure to be able to place the sensors. So you start off with this ideal of we should have sensors here, 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 and here. You have regulations where you have to have sensors because you've got these intersections that are just known hazards. But you very quickly, you have to go put the sensor where you're going to be allowed to put the sensor. So that's fair to them. And also, in a lot of the more deprived neighborhoods, they would put the sensor and then someone would come and throw stuff at it. It'd get broken. They'd come out, they'd replace the sensor, get broken again, and then after a couple of times, they were like, you broke your toy, you don't get to have it anymore, and so you get these gaps of sensor coverage. So there is a sort of story behind it, but initially I was like, wow, I think there's something that we could do around thinking about the placement of sensors in the urban landscape, right? And thinking about what coverage means, what do we mean when we talk about sensor coverage conceptually? What does it mean to be in a gap? This is the spatial demography piece, who's actually in these gaps, and are they any different from the people who do seem to have sensors? And can we do something about the decision-making piece? Is there a way to think about this? Right, so this is Newcastle upon Tyne, my second home city. And this is a map of multiple deprivation. So we have this metric, if anyone's been paying attention. In the last week, the 2025 data came out for the UK, and everyone's been mapping these data. So it's kind of cool. It's an index of multiple deprivation. It's got lots of different dimensions. Anything in red, these, and so like where it says like for Cowgate, like 223 out of 32,000, this is like most deprived in all of England. So it isn't like in the city or in the region, this is like in all of England, these neighborhoods are like some of the most deprived across the entire country, and by country I mean England. And what was interesting was that each of these that are highlighted here, they are among the most deprived in the country. They also had some of the biggest like motorways, so like highways going right through them, and they had no air quality sensor. So on like every front, you would just think like, this doesn't make any sense. Like if it was actually about the air pollution, you'd have a sensor. If it's about vulnerable populations, you'd have a sensor. And this was not, and you know, nobody did this on purpose. This was something that just sort of emerged over time. And so our idea was, could we think about decision-making around sensor placement? I told Dao Chen earlier today, I don't know anything about optimization, but I love it so much. This paper, the paper on, I actually have one optimization paper. But could we think about like how we place the sensors and what ideal sensors would look like? This was super fun because you have to decide like how are we conceptualizing coverage, right? Like is it about the quality of the data that the air quality sensor is generating? Because if so, that distance decay function is they're really good, and then they sort of fall off the further away you are from them. So if you're talking about coverage, almost everyone's going to be in a desert, like even if you've got lots and lots of air quality sensors. If, on the other hand, it's more about neighborhood representation, like do your decision makers care enough about you to have some kind of measurement of air quality for your neighborhood, that's a little bit easier for us to conceptualize, right? So that was sort of an interesting interaction between the engineers and us. And very quickly, I have to say, the engineers, like, they were not interested in any of this. So we started with like wanting to collaborate, and they were like, this just isn't interesting to us at all. And so somewhere in there is a lesson, but it was still a really fun project that I think had pretty good outputs. And the cool thing was that, so this is like, we've got tools for this. Like we don't even have to go out and create anything like off the shelf. We know how to think about maximizing coverage for different kinds of groups. So what we wanted to do was to think about, if you had a given number of sensors, where would you put those sensors so that you made sure that you covered like the most children possible, right? The most older people possible. In theory, the most health vulnerable people, but that data is much harder to come by, right? And that's not complicated to be able to do. Right, so we did it two different ways, and this paper is in the Annals. I didn't put any paper citations, but the paper's in the Annals if you want to see it, AAG Annals. And we do it two ways. One is just that we try to like maximize coverage for like all the kids. With two different conceptualizations of like what that coverage would look like. One that's narrower and more reflects like the actual measurements of the sensor, and one that's wider that's more around representation. And then we did it with several groups, with young people, older people, and the working population, partly to show that you could visualize the trade-offs. Like you can't have everything, right? Like, this is the important thing about this kind of thing. Is like you can write a paper that says this is how you do it. But actually, as soon as you privilege one group, given the way people sort across space, you are almost necessarily not privileging another group, because the unhealthy people and the old people and the kids, they don't all live in one place where you can just put like one sensor. They live in different parts of the city, right? So visualizing those trade-offs. And so I'm just going to show a couple of maps, because this is the sort of thing where I have to be careful because I would just start talking forever. But just to say that this is for the older population. And if you sort of assume that coverage is something like 0.5 kilometer, we could cover, with this on the bottom right, about half of the older population in Newcastle. And you'll notice that it's a pretty nicely distributed network. Like it just covers a lot of the city. If, though, we looked at where the working population was, that's really different. Because they cluster highly. So for one thing, you can cover, like if you really want to cover a working population, it's easy. You put a couple of sensors in just a very few locations of the city because they all come together during the day. But it's a very different geography from the older population. And when you look at the population of young people, it's also slightly different. And so you start to see that, like, when we interviewed lots of local authorities, so like local government people, and like no one's trying to not do a good job, but everyone has fixed budgets, limited understanding of like where people are and who needs to be covered. And it was just sort of interesting to see that, like, it's not that anyone's doing this on purpose, it's just that the tools aren't there. And their tools aren't there to actually build conversation with community members to explain, like, I know it looks like we haven't covered you here, but this is sort of these are the steps that we went through to arrive at the network. And so in the end, we have this decision support tool. And this paper is out in Geographical Journal, I think. But it got these different criteria. And the thing that I think is sort of neat is that you can sort of click on, you produce lots and lots and lots of networks, and it shows you for every network, when you click on one, how well you're going to cover the different groups, so that you can't avoid it. Like, you can just see, like, if I want to maximize coverage of this group, I have very few options for networks that are going to do a decent job with the other groups. And it was not ever designed to like tell people, go put your sensors here. It's more like a tool to go out and talk to people and say, well, like, this is how we arrive at these decisions. And for that, I think, like, this was very interesting to me. And my point is that, well, there are like no data. So, right, I mean, we just use census data. Like, this is all methods to figure out how to think about what coverage would look like. And the methods are really well known. But I think there are things that should make us think. Like, these aren't the only kinds of networks that we have. But we take the data for air quality as a given, right? Like, when a city says, like, here's what our air quality is, we take that as, like, high quality data, even as spatial scientists, without necessarily thinking about, like, where were the locations of those sensors and how much should that matter to us. So that, to me, was a little bit illuminating. But also sort of thinking about, like, how can we do better? Like better data, better methods, better outreach to local decision makers, better outreach to community. I have a lot of, I'm going to have to move a little bit faster. I have a lot of thoughts about sensor networks, and because it's citizen science doesn't get us there. Like, this is an example of where citizen science is just not going to work, because the people who have the energy and, like, the attention and, like, the know-how to go out and get a sensor in their neighborhood are very particular kinds of people and communities, right? And so you actually do need something that is a little bit, at least a combination of that bottom up, and you need a little bit of the top down to come in and say, actually, we're a collective and we need to ensure that the data quality work for the entire area. Okay, and this was a great team, right? To do this work, we had postdocs in geography, we had a research data scientist, we had a research software engineer. It took a lot of people with lots of very specific expertise to do this. All right. Track 6, public transportation heat exposure in a warming world. So this is ongoing. This is something that we're working on right now. And this is a project thinking about how health and climate change and transportation intersect. And again, it's got that demography piece at the bottom, which is where I sort of come in. This was also a project that originated, I was appointed at the Turing Institute for like 40% of my time. In the UK, we do a lot of like partial contracts. And so 40% of my time the last couple of years was at the Alan Turing Institute in the Urban Analytics program. And so we had lots of projects and lots of postdocs and sort of thinking about, like, okay, well, we've produced all these data. What should we be using these data for? And this was a project that emerged that was driven a little bit by all of this data stuff that we had done, and no one being entirely sure like what we were supposed to do with the data. Okay, so a really good example of heat and public transportation is the London Tube, right? It's been around for a really long time, has a lot of stations, covers lots of lines, lots of kilometers, and pre-COVID was at about 5 million people a day. So this is like a really big public transportation system, right? And we know that it's just going to get hotter, right? So like only 4 out of the 11 underground lines have air conditioning. Average summer temperatures are expected to increase. Probability of heat waves is going to increase. Mean maximum air temperatures in August are going to increase. Like basically, it's going to get really warm, and the public transportation infrastructure isn't built for it. And usually I would say, like, has anyone been hot in London? Like, the thing is, it gets really hot. And I know it just probably seems like a joke because England is not a hot place, but it actually does get miserably and unhealthily hot. And the thing is that it's already here. Like it's hard to see the y-axis, but that's 35 degrees Celsius there at the top. We're already hitting days, like in 2019, we were already hitting days that were at 35 degrees Celsius, and none of the infrastructure is built for this, right? So it's different here, or like, you've got air conditioning. Like, we don't have air conditioning, right? All of England was built mostly to try and keep places warm. So it's a huge revolution to try and think about how we're going to cool our housing down, our public transportation down. Okay, so our idea was, how do we estimate current and future heat exposure on the tube and who's most affected, right? And I don't have, this is like a whole talk, but so I'm just giving you like the highlights that I think are relevant for the things that I'm talking about. So this is interesting because it's a simple question, but the data requirements are really hard because you need to know who's traveling, right? You need to know their demographic characteristics, you need to know their health characteristics, and you've got to know where they're going and how they're getting there, right? And you need to know what the temperature is on board, right? So we had kind of cool data to be able to do this, and one of them was a synthetic population. So that's actually the big thing, is that being able to go down to the individual level and estimating the health characteristics of individuals, so not populations of neighborhoods, but at the individual level, knowing something about how someone's traveling, where they're traveling, what kinds of health characteristics, what their age is, like that we could get from the synthetic population. Knowing about the tube and like travel times and route estimation, and then weather and heat wave days. So we had these sort of three data sets that we were able to combine. So what we do is we build the current and the future synthetic population, and then we isolate the people who are taking the tube, and then we look at where they're going, and then we calculate what the temperatures are on board, and then we look at sort of like what the impacts are at the individual level, and sort of like what kinds of neighborhoods are carrying like a heavier burden. A thing that really stinks about this is that if you want to know for sure about journeys that people are taking in this way, you have to focus on the working population, because that's how you get that destination at the other end. And like, it's great because we can focus on the health component, but really it's older it isn't only older people, but older people on public transportation is a huge thing, because we're going to get, for sure, more and more older people, and we'd really like them to be mobile and get to go places, and we'd really like them to not be in cars. And this was not a thing that we could do with this. So this is a constraint that we faced from the outset, which is a real bummer. So on the left here, we have average summer days, and on the right, we have hottest summer days. And these are extreme degree minutes. So this is just basically like how many minutes is somebody spending in an extreme temperature. And our extreme temperature was 30 degrees Celsius, which is really, really hot for England and for London. But you see that on an average day, like it is mostly okay. Like the dark blue is like, okay, red, not good. Lighter blue, right? And so you see that there are some areas of the city that are sort of, they're already lighter blue just for an average day in 2019. And if it looks kind of radial, that's because, it matters what tube line you're on, because some of them have air conditioning and some of them don't. So it really matters like radially, like what your closest tube stop is. In 2039, we start to see on the edges that there are areas just on an average day that have more extreme degree minutes, right? For hottest summer days, which we know we're going to have more of, right? We already have pockets of the city that are more affected, right? In 2039, so I asked, we had a meeting this week, talked about this. I was like, why between 2019 and 2039, it just doesn't change a whole lot? And I want it to like pack a punch. I want to go out and say like, look, you think it's bad now, it's gonna be really bad in 2039. He said, well, the thing is, we're using 30 degrees for our extreme temperature, and like, there's nowhere else to go. Like it's already really hot. He's like, so we could run it again at 35 degrees. And at 35 degrees, you'll get a big change, because we don't have very many, on the hottest day, there aren't so many 35 degree days, but we'll get a lot of 35 degree days in 2039. So it's just kind of like, how do you decide what is really hot? How do you decide what you're going to present? Like, what is actually going on? It was, it's a lot to deal with. But what we can definitely say is that, these are definitely like, there's the spatial inequities of like which parts of the city are carrying more of a burden. Like I think that's evident from the maps. And it's not only spatial. I took the table out because I knew that no one wants to look at a table right? Like all those columns of numbers. But basically, like more vulnerable populations are slightly more impacted. Non-white ethnicities are also slightly more impacted. As I already said, we couldn't really look at age. It's not statistically significant, so that's why I say this slightly more, which is also something bothering us, because if we publish a paper that says, for sure, no problem, like actually minorities not really affected, that I only want to say if I am like super, super, super sure that that is actually the way it works, right? So there's a lot of caution in trying to figure out like, what are we actually going to be comfortable saying we think is the case? Because I don't want to say it's definitely a problem. Like the way we've done our analysis, that doesn't allow it. But I don't want to say it's not a problem because like some policymaker could pick that up and run with it. So thinking about how to present our results has taken a lot of our time. And I took the table out for this too, but it is kind of neat because the thing we can do with this synthetic population, like looking in the future, is we can say, well, what if we air condition a few of the lines? Will things get better and how much will they get better? And we can absolutely do that. So we have this great table. But basically, if we install air conditioning on like these deeper, perversely, the deeper the line, like the hotter it gets, if we just do some of those, it's like low-hanging fruit because lots of people take it. And like air conditioning. So like we can run that and we can say like we think you should focus on like the northern line and like you should do this line, this line, this line, which I think is kind of a neat artifact of the way we approach this problem. Okay, so the inequity of heat exposure risk, it's pretty significant in spatial terms, I think. There's this trickiness of estimation, but that is like the fun part, right? Like that was like really kind of cool. It's like to try and figure out like, here's the thing we want to measure, how do we measure it? That I think gets a lot of us out of bed in the morning. And it's a really good example of where geographers have a lot to contribute, right? Because you need to know something about estimating the heat piece. You need the mobility piece. You need the demography piece. You need the health piece. Like no one person is able to do all of this. And that's what geographers are really good at. But do you know, like, why don't we just have thermometers on the trains? Like, why do I have to guess at what the temperature is on the train when you know this is a problem? Like, this to me is a really great example of like, come on, like, we're gonna get a paper out of this, but it'd be even better if we didn't need to have a paper because you already knew how hot it is on these trains. Because our estimations are, like, they're wonky. Like, you know, like we're making so many assumptions about like, trips and station temperatures and train temperatures, and it's going to be hotter if there are more people on the train. Like we can't do any of that. But you know what can are the sensors that we already that already exist. So I suppose this is an example of like where like you could just focus on the shiny piece, but what we should probably do is just say like, come on, Transport for London, get your act together, right? And it's quite possible they don't want to know, right? There's an element of like, if you tell us how bad it is, we're going to have to do something about it. Okay, and this was another great team. Like we have a health researcher, we have Bowen is the postdoc who's led on all the analysis and the writing, a research software engineer, and me. So it's sort of a fun Turing Institute team that brought lots of different kinds of expertise to the table. Okay, this last piece, track 7, is really fast because, because I knew that people might get fidgety. But this is about data infrastructure, which I love, and it's about satellite imagery, but it's about satellite imagery for social scientists and health researchers and policymakers. So people who don't really want to deal with pixels or imagery or like any of that stuff, right? So basically, we bring that in-house, right? We figure out like where are the data gaps, right? How do we fill them? And so, so we've got, as I said earlier, we've got methods, we've got compute, which is a really big thing, right? So you've got your methods, you've got your data, and then you need a whole bunch of space to be able to do this stuff, right? So that is also something that has changed a lot in the last few years. And I am a firm believer, like I love satellite imagery because it doesn't have that it doesn't have a lot of these problems that other new forms of data have, like that social media or phone data. The applications are different, but you get universal coverage. And it's true that like knowing what relationships, like knowing what's happening on the ground in North America doesn't necessarily tell you what's happening anywhere else in the world. But that's still huge. Like rather than like trying to pick up like what people are saying on Twitter about being left behind, you could actually like start to think about like what do these places actually functionally look like on the ground. So I'm definitely a convert. And I'm really big into like helping people who could use these data actually have access to them. So this is the project. We're called Imago, or the our funder has called us the data service for imagery, because we belong to like a whole set of data services that were funded. And we do 3 things. And we've only been off the ground for about a year. But it was about developing research-ready data products. And we're going to be around for, like, we're funded for 5 years. So we have like another 4 years to go. But building off of all this cool stuff that is out there to think about what kinds of data products could be developed. And I think this is kind of an exciting piece, is thinking about the data distribution channels. So we've often relied, satellite, I should be clear, satellite imagery in like demography or economics or any other social science is not a new thing. Like this is like, there is a strong literature and people have been doing this for a long time, but you had to have someone who could deal with the imagery piece. So it has tended to be like very specific areas where, like areas as in like departments or research teams that were able to do this. And it would be great if it was a little bit more democratized. And most people don't actually need to work with pixels, because what most people want is to know, how green is my neighborhood, right? They want to be able to pull in like census tract data and then something else, often environmental, about a neighborhood. They never need to know what was happening at the pixel level. They need good administrative level data, right? And what they also need is to have those data in places where they go get their data. So like longitudinal surveys, where you can often get contextual variables. Like you should be able to get those variables at the same place that you shop for your other kinds of data, right? And we need to think about building capacity. And so I was co-director of this. People have asked me, how is it at Harvard? Well, I have to say, like, one of the really sad things has been, I was co-director of like the biggest project that I have. Like this proposal was huge and like had an interview phase and like it was just massive. And then we won it and then I bailed. So I'm now like a little deputy director over there at the end, but we're almost at like this is huge. Like we're like, this is a big team of people. And you know, you've got PhD students and postdocs and research software engineers. So it's another case of like where you really need this expertise coming from all the angles to try and deliver this thing. And it's also, I think, like a high risk of failure. So it's also just an interesting, like, can we do it? Like, can we do a thing and then actually have people pick it up and use it? And we'll see. Okay, so track 8, I'm gonna tie it all together. Okay, so big deal. I think that AI and novel data are actually pretty big game changers, right? We get new insights, we get new applications, we get totally new views into human behavior and preferences, which is pretty neat. Like where are people actually going at a minute scale, this at scale piece, and it's also often fun, right? This is the stuff that keeps me up at night. Industry versus publicly owned data. I don't think we want industry owning our data. I think publicly owned data are really important. I think we need to care about investment into public data, and I think we need to care about slow, theoretically grounded, impactful research. I think we should be cautious about bandwagons. And as I said earlier, I think this has lots of spillover effects, right? It affects publication, hiring, external research funding. I think that questions should determine the method and the data, not the other way around. And lastly, I think that complex spatial inequality challenges, the kind of stuff I work on, they require a really complex approach. And some of this is teams. Like none of this is stuff that I can do all by myself, right? I need to be part of a bigger team of people with lots of different kinds of expertise, but it requires interdisciplinarity. It just really does. And I know, like in a place like this, I'm preaching to the converted, as they would say. You already know this, but it is, I think, increasingly true. And it is also very, very interesting, right? But it also requires a lot of different kinds of data integration. Like we're just going to have to think a lot about not one kind of data off the shelf, but how lots of different kinds of data are going to fit together. And that requires a different kind of expertise that is also really important. I think theory is really important. Like otherwise, like what are we doing? And like, I don't think theory is dead. I think that we need to spend a lot of time. And to me, theory is just like, why do we think this thing is happening? Like, what do we think these relationships are? Whether or not you have a testable hypothesis, but you should have some idea of how you think the world is working. And I think that we should care about what these theories are. And I think that we should care about all of the social science that's happening under the hood. So it does not necessarily mean complex methods. What it means is starting with questions, building with theory, and then picking and choosing, because we have this, as I said, this huge smorgasbord of data and methods to choose from. We should be picking the most appropriate of those. And this is the end. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel. This has really been a great talk. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, spending your Friday night with us. Hopefully you feel like you've been out, maybe at a concert, and now the artist...
Did you want to light your lighters?
The artist has gone backstage to have her drink of water. This is the time for the encore, okay? So the Q&A encore. This is being webcast, so you cannot ask a question without a microphone in your hand. So go ahead and raise your hands, and I will run the room for you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful lecture. Your words have been music to my ears.
Nice. I like it.
My question is, how many variables have you tried to combine and analyze? Let me put some context to it. For example, you were working on air quality index. You were trying to figure out what the air quality will be. Then the temperature in those transport tubes. As an urban planner, what I feel like, you have all these individual variables that you have to work on, and then come up with a strategic development plan or a master plan or general plan for the city. You need to work for keeping the property values. You need to work on optimal transportation routes for the people. You need to look into climate change issues. These are all so many different variables that impact the main plan that you will ultimately make. And why we have been so reluctant to use data analytics in these challenges, because these challenges tend to be so complex that we sort of try to deal with them individually, and we don't sort of combine them to look at a bigger picture. I don't know if it's just a dream or what, but maybe a time will come that just like a ChatGPT doing an essay, because it has so many such a big library of words and sentences and phrases, that it combines those phrases and sort of writes an essay for you. Maybe one day we'll have millions and billions of data points to sort of combine people's opinion about how they react about property values, how they think about temperature in a tube, and sort of combine all those things, and then tell a program or an algorithm to sort of map a transport route in a segment of a city or in a part of a city. How do you feel that when will that be we will be able to do? And again, where I started from, how many variables so far have you tried to combine?
So that's a lot. I probably have I have lots of reactions to it. Part of it is that I have a little bit of a feeling that we know the answers to a lot of things these days. Like the multi-dimensional piece and the trade-offs is like, that is really, really hard. But we a lot of times we kind of know, and I worry that if we ask ChatGPT or similar to do this for us, like, what do we do if we don't like the answer? Right? I mean, so you can't hand off your analytics and get like this magical solution, no matter how complicated the tool is, because the problem is human, right? The problem is like people and money and will. And if we don't like the answer, we're still not going to do it. So I think we could just focus on the piece that we sort of know how to work through, which is that there are always going to be trade-offs. I don't think there is a magical solution. What we need to do is to talk more about, like, here's the deal. These things are all connected to each other, and if we do this is, actually, I just think I'll be depressed if I follow my line of thinking all the way through. I mean, it's kind of hopeless, because people don't want to have some things in their neighborhoods, but actually we need to have these things go in their neighborhoods, and we've faced this for a long time, which is, like, why we have a little bit of top-down. Okay, so multidimensional, putting everything in. I mean, maybe. You could think about getting multiple scenarios. I think what it would probably give you is, like, if you do this, here are the trade-offs. What you could expect to get is, like, here are the trade-offs. Are you comfortable with these trade-offs? I just think that the failures are human, not analytical. But I'll have to think on this for, like, a stronger rationale. But I just think, I don't know. To me, it's like poverty, or like food insecurity. Like, we know what to do. We need to give people food. We need to give people money. Like, why are we not doing this? Like no analytical model is going to fix that for you. It's just like, right? And actually sometimes we become a little bit complicit in it because we need a project. We need the research projects and the papers to say, like, this is why you need to feed people. Instead of like taking all of that money that's in then just feeding the people, right? So like, it's a very it's all very complicated. I don't know, what do you, I feel like I've totally, first question, I feel like I've just bombed it. But it was a hard question.
What?
You think about it, then you
why
tell
don't you
me,
think?
well,
Why don't you
and
think
I'll
about
think
that?
too.
And
Maybe
maybe
a
you can
magic
discuss
answer
at the end. But we have a question over here from Dave Hundula.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for the talk. Rachel, I'm wondering how you are thinking about your chasing the shiny things tension when it comes to course design and curriculum design. In our quest for exciting courses and growing enrollments, I wonder about the opportunity costs that you referred to.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really hard one because like you want people to be employed, right? And so like there is an element of like getting butts in seats. I also think in some ways that and I don't know how to get it back, but I think in some ways we have seeded this concept of in loco parentis, which is that, that when parents sent their kids to universities like 50 or 60 years ago, like not even in my, but like definitely like generations before me, the idea was that the university was actually acting as parents and the university was telling you what to do, right? And we, for a variety of really good reasons, have decided that is not really our role anymore. These are adults, they come here, and somehow we need to try, I think, try to claw back a little bit. And I think it matters for teaching kids how to study, how to learn, how to be productive members of society. But I think it really matters on the curriculum side because it's how we try to communicate. There's just some stuff that we believe that you need to know, and you need to trust us on this, right? And that's really hard in the academic environment that we operate in, because there is this, certainly at the research, like, by the time you're a master's student or a PhD student, I think there is sort of like you need people to want to spend money on getting that degree, which means the degree needs to be useful, but it needs to sound sexy. We interviewed on the podcast, it's not going to come out until January, but Anthony Robinson at Penn State, who heads up their, it's like their online GI science program. But he's a cartographer. And then when we interviewed him, we were like, well, why don't you just teach cartography? And he's like, are you kidding me? If we call it cartography, no one's going to come and like pay money to do this. He's like, so it's just all by stealth. Like you have to call it GI science, but you try and get in the other stuff the other ways. And I think that like that's a potential solution, but it takes a lot of coordination across different subdisciplines. It takes doing a degree in a way that I think we're maybe out of the habit of doing. Like it means urban geography needs to talk to everyone else and figure out like when are we covering the core stuff? Like, what is the core stuff? Where do we think people are going to get this? A kind of pet peeve I have about this is that, for example, I don't think, actually, well, I mean, maybe Dylan can answer something else, but I think increasingly at a lot of places, if you're a quantitative human geographer, you get to teach methods. Like, you're not getting to go in and teach the urban geography, because the urban geography is something that gets to be taught by the people who don't do numbers. And this, I think, is happening in lots of places. That is also, I think, a challenge, because we need this, you need like everyone doing everything in a collective way. And I suppose it's like fitting the vegetables into your kid's meal. Like you're gonna have to sneak it in, but you need to agree, like what is the stuff that we're sneaking in? And I think it's content, but I think it's also like ways of working. Like we really need to be training students, like this is how long. My students, a couple of weeks ago when we were doing cartography, and my students were like, this map took me 2 hours to make. And I was like, oh, 2 hours, that's amazing. Like these maps I'm showing you, they take like 8 hours, right? Like the level of expectation around like, how long does it take to do something that's really good? Like they don't know. Like how are they going to know if we don't teach them? Like actually, like reading a book. Like reading a book is actually going to take you like a few days maybe. Like then this is normal. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Dachin?
Yeah. Is this going to be an optimization question?
No, it's not about optimization. Thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing those important thoughts. I think about the discipline, but I think it's more than just geography. A lot of social science and also maybe other disciplines would benefit from hearing your talk. I think those are really important thoughts and also timely. And one of the things you mentioned is about next generation training and some of the issues, and you are editor and also I'm also an editor. I also noticed something that it's really trending. It's like if, as an editor, if we don't see, so when we see, like when we receive a manuscript, if it's not, data is not new, the method is not new, and the result is not really shining. So because every day we receive so many manuscript submissions, and so it's very likely the manuscript will be rejected. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about, for our, like for instance, for our graduate students, what will be the strategy moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, so I've edited a journal. So I edit the cross-disciplinary section of the Annals now, but before that, for 8 years, I edited Geographical Analysis, which is like, we like to say, like the flagship journal of geographical methods. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I don't actually care a whole bunch about whether the data and the methods are new. What I care about is like, do you have a story to tell? Like can you motivate this? Like, why are you doing this? Why does it need to be done? Who should read this? And I think if you can answer like why is this interesting? If you can answer those questions, especially like who should read this, that if you don't know who should read this paper and it's not communicated in your paper, like it doesn't matter anything else that you did, I think. And I don't think that people are always thinking about that. But like when I write a decision letter, like a thing that I often say is, if you make these changes, I think it will help you reach a wider audience. And I know that people don't care. They just want to be published. But actually, the whole point of writing something is that, well, it's true. I mean, right? Like there is no line on our CVs that says this many people read my paper, right? So we do care about just getting papers out the door, but we should care about whether or not people are reading our papers. And I think, to me, a lot of that is about framing. I think it's okay to have, like, if these were the right data and the right methods, and you can explain like why we do it this way. But I don't get a lot of that. I don't get a lot of really great papers. When I say, if you think you've got a strong paper, send it to the Annals. Please send it to the Annals. Like it should be. I would like it to be like where you think you've got something really great that you would like the discipline to see. Those papers get submitted there, and you want people to read it. Yeah, so the advice is to spend time on your paper and frame it well. And don't cut corners. Like a good paper takes a while. And you said across the social sciences, I'll make this really quick. I think that, I don't know urban planning and publication so well, but geography has moved to a very rapid publication. And it was not like that even 20 years ago. And everyone is not doing that. If you look at sociology or economics, it is not what is happening at all, right? You need a few papers. that model of for sociology, 1 or 2 papers a year, maybe. You pack it all into one and you spend a lot of time on it. That's far in our rearview mirror for geography, and I would love us to get a little bit of it back because it helps with this reviewer crunch. It helps with our impact. There's no downside to it, except that the older people in the room really, when we're reading people's CVs, need to understand, this is a thing we want. Fewer is better.
I have another question about your experience as a journal editor, and that's about how AI is affecting that, not just on what the authors are doing, but what the reviewers are doing. That really scares me if people are using AI to write their peer reviews.
Yes, and so it is a thing that you should not be doing. So if anyone, has been tempted, actually, our policy is that you cannot do it, and you shouldn't do it because you should read the paper and it really matters. But also, you just handed somebody's intellectual property over to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, and that you definitely shouldn't be doing. But I think sometimes the things we need to be doing, they're hard. So we tell people they're not allowed to do it, and I have to cross my fingers that people are actually obeying that. And it's the same with manuscripts. And I think that with both, it is really hard because we want to be inclusive, and we want to be a global discipline, and we want to be in conversation with people around the world. And it's very easy for people like you and me to say, don't do this because it's our language. we made all the rules. Like coincidentally, this works really well for us. And so I'm very sympathetic to especially people not in North America or the UK or Australia or New Zealand, but like anywhere else, like including continental Europe. I'm very sympathetic to like maybe AI could help me a little bit. It's just, it doesn't write well. Like it's not as good. And like maybe you won't be able to tell, but it's like it actually is not going to do the thing that you want it to do. You're going to need to write. So I would say no AI in the writing process or the reviewing process would be my advice, but I think it can be really hard, and I think I say this from a position of not really needing to, but yeah. But it's definitely a problem.
All right, we got a question on this side of the room. Dylan?
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm thinking about one of your bigger messages, which is basically don't sacrifice good science for what's new and shiny in AI. And I suppose the problem there, thinking about it as a researcher, is that the individual incentives don't really support, pushing against the current trend. And so in some sense, it's kind of a collective action problem, in that as a community, somehow we need to, figure out how to push in the direction of the good science and resist some of those temptations. And so do you have a sense of a couple of kind of concrete things that we could do as a research community to try and support kind of your vision of what we should be doing?
Like slow science, like how do we get to a slightly slower science? Well, and I wanted to say a thing about the AI, which I think, I've definitely said in other venues, is that an argument that is made for like the writing process is that it speeds it up. You can be way more productive, and I think the last thing we need is more papers. Like this is just like no, because we don't need more production. We actually need slower production. And I think a big piece of it is going to fall on the people who are more senior in the field, the people who are making decisions, either around papers, especially around hiring, when we're supervising students, and that's, it's really hard. If you're supervising a PhD student, like what do you do? Like if you tell them, slow down, one really good paper, you're gonna be great, they might not get a job. Like that, it is very difficult. I have a suspicion that we may start to see a little bit of a sort of bifurcation of like two different levels of like kinds of researcher in the spatial sciences, like the sort of rapid production, and then like this other level. And I think that the other level is going to be the one that's going to be higher status. So I also just think it just makes me nervous a little bit for like how we're all functioning together. And I don't think that this is only a quantitative. I think that it is a non-quantitative, it's a qualitative research issue also, that we've just gotten, the pressures have increased on everyone to just for that throughput. I don't know how we slow down. I do know that you should, for every single paper you're submitting, you need to review 3 papers. So if you find that unsustainable, you need to slow down how many papers you're submitting. I know that, that's the thing. And we wouldn't have a reviewer crisis then if people would just do the reviewing that they need to be doing. That was unexpected.
Right, I think there was, Deirdre, do you want to?
I'm interested in the geography of the way that the science is being done. I mean, you're in a really unique perspective. I mean, folks have brought up your editorial role. You're seeing submissions from all over the world. You also have spent a lot of time on both sides of the Atlantic. Are you seeing kind of more convergence in the approaches to these questions and kind of use of methods and going towards one thing across these places where you've worked? Or are you seeing distinct cultures kind of appear, different parts of the world kind of going one way versus another?
So where I would feel most comfortable saying something is definitely going to be like UK, Europe, and North America. The rest of world, I think, doesn't even get a look in a lot of times. It's just so hard to even get a paper to go out for review at a top journal. It's just really difficult. And this is, it's easy to say this is, if you come from the rest of the world. And it's easy to put it at the doorstep of quality, but the fact is people don't have access to methods. They can't even read papers. They don't have access to any of the papers. So you get a paper and nothing's been submitted, nothing's been cited that was published in the last 15 years, and that's going to be like that's fatal, but also like that's like it's just not fair, right? And so this is a little bit about infrastructure and access. And I do think that we do have more access to published research, but people don't have access to data or to compute, right? So they're kind of limited, and to training. But convergence in the US and the UK. I don't know, I came from a center in the UK that was a lot of economic geographers who are empirical but not quantitative, which means that it's still a model of largely one or two middle-aged white men writing together sometimes, but not always. But it makes for very high impact outputs. And so maybe there's an argument for us, because part of what's happened is that like if you publish, like if I'm on this many papers, I can be on this many papers because it's like 10% of my 10%, right? And so then I have like another 90% to spend on research. Like I'm part of this. My productivity has never been so high, but if you're on these big research teams and suddenly like there are lots of people writing things. But I don't know that I see that much difference between the UK and the US. In the UK, we have our research excellence framework, I think is what it's called. So we have evaluation every few years. So typically departments are evaluated by the quality of their research. So there's a little bit of pressure, but it's pressure to for everyone to have one solid paper in the last 6 or 7 years, which I think is a fair thing to expect of any academic. So the pressures for publication might be a little bit lower than I think they are here. I think there's just a lot of pressure. And I think that's not great either. Like, how do we get back to this being a really great job? Because it is, right? If you can get the space to think.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for coming over here and sharing your research, and it's an honor to have you. So actually, I follow a lot in the online, but hope you will not take as I stalk you, but I actually follow you, So I have actually query, but before going to that point, I would like to talk about certainly it is unethical to actually upload or any kind of papers in the ChatGPT or any kind of large language model. But those large language model, the kind of CEO or the other people, they're actually secretly making those kind of deal with the journal. They're actually putting all kind of papers over there. Who is actually preventing those people? We're not doing that, but they're actually doing that. Maybe many of your papers is already over there, right?
Okay, so my hot take is I don't understand why we still are using these big publishers. Now that we have all this infrastructure, this is another collective thing. Why are we not starting our own journals and just publishing online? And we're not. And part of it is that you need an impact, in a lot of places you need an impact factor for the journal where your paper is published. But yeah, they are not in service to us in the same way that many of our institutions are not in service to us or our discipline. They're in service to themselves, right? And so yeah, you don't get a lot of control. And the geographical analysis is owned by Ohio State University Department of Geography. They own that journal, and still getting Wiley to not do bullshit, to not do nonsense is almost impossible. And that's when you own the journal. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I think it's really bad.
My query, one of the slide, I think couple of slides, you talk about the sensor quality, right? The sensor distribution. What is our actually ultimate goal? Equal sensor distribution or the kind of equal exposure? What we want to actually achieve with that?
Well, this may not be the question that you're asking, but a question that I would get sometimes when we were in the middle of the research was you're positing that coverage is a good thing. You think surveillance is really good. I'm like, well, I think in the case for air quality, yeah, we need to know what air quality is for different places. But my ideal for the project was really just to think through, could we think through like in the Annals paper where there's actually there's a figure that shows where for the urban observatory with an actually existing network, where there's under coverage and where there's just surplus coverage. And I think that is a useful thing, because I would say if you've got these sensors, you could just make little movements that would provide better coverage. And an argument that's often made is that we're not going to actually use, we don't use those readings. Those go straight into our model, and everyone gets an estimate of air quality because we're just going to generate a surface. That's fine, but the people who are really far from any sensor, you're pretty unsure what the actual air quality is for them, and why should some people have to live in high uncertainty areas and other people get to have 3 sensors in their neighborhood, and also they've got one at their school, and they petitioned the city to have one on their street. Like it's, yeah. There's a lot of inequity built into this, and it's thinking about like being covered is a good thing. Like actually, you want to be represented in the data infrastructure that the city is building. You want to count.
So we are coming up near the end of our time, but I want to make sure we don't leave out our online viewers. So we have one question from online.
All right.
And that will have to be the last question. And so, do you want to? All right, I will go ahead and read it. So, if you were to make a policy recommendation based on your smart city and spatial inequality project finding, what would it be?
It would be that before placing a single air quality sensor, there should be a discussion about what the purpose of the sensor network is and what those data will be used for. So for example, if it's city branding, and you just need to be known as a smart city, well, you can do whatever you want. If you're planning to use the data, then I think you need a plan. Like, are you hoping to be able to say something about, like, who's exposed to poor air quality, who's most vulnerable to high pollution? If that is the case, you really have to design your network with an understanding of where people are located. I mean, there's another shortcoming of what we did is like the thing about censuses is where people are at night. It's like, right? So for the older population and the kid population, we know where they are at night, but we really ideally would know where people are during the day, right? So you need a lot of information, but you need to think about where are people going to be and can we actually estimate what the air quality is for those people?
All right, fantastic. So let's thank Rachel again. And I have 3 other quick thank yous. First of all, to the staff who made this room and event work so well. To Malcolm Comeaux, without whom this event could not be possible. And of course, to all of you for giving up your Friday night for an engaging and interesting conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.